Hello and welcome to the Lessons Learned from Early Adopters by Rob King. This is a presentation I did at the RPA Conference on the 22nd of March 2018. Before I begin, I'd like to say a few words about myself and why I'm qualified to talk about robotic process automation. At Wizard Innovation, we help organisations to both start, scale and sustain their automation journey, driving an innovative approach to their organisation. And that includes not only the process of automation, but also the business models to sustain and support automation. I started out my career in IT. My final year thesis had been on the topic of neural networks and artificial intelligence, something that really more came to the fore in recent years. But while in IT, I was involved in driving change using a very collaborative approach, rapid application development and joint application development workshops. This collaborative approach made perfect sense, and in the late 90s I moved into Lean and Six Sigma, helping organisations to eliminate waste and drive efficiency in their processes. I was in a Lean role when actually the modern day automation really came to the fore, and back in 2012 you piloted and implemented robotic desktop automation. Robotic desktop automation then led to the opportunity to drive innovation and change through an innovation function, which really was about not only introducing new technologies, but also about the culture for adoption and how you can help organizations to drive change successfully. So that's enough about me. Let's have a look and think about some of the lessons learned on the 5-year journey of understanding robotic process automation. The first lesson I have is out there are those who talk and there are those who do. Imagine for a moment that the planet Jupiter is the population of all of the people who are talking about process automation in all its guises. And then imagine the size of the Earth is the population of all the people who are actually involved and actively doing something with robotic process automation. Yes, there's a huge difference between the two. Lots and lots of people are talking about automation, but actually there seems to be a massive chasm between those who talk about it and those who actually get started to do something about it. Bridging that chasm is something we try to do and help organisations through. But it's a big challenge. There are lots of reasons that organisations can find for not automating. And these can be reasons such as the impact on the people, the fear of technology, etc. But everyone knows there are many positives to automation: improved quality, increased volumes of work, etc. But increasingly there's another reason for starting to think about automation, and that reason is simply survival. If you're not thinking about automating right now, then you can be pretty sure many of your competitors are, and the first ones to jump that chasm from talking to doing will be the ones who are more likely to succeed. As we'll see today, there are many options to fit every need and every budget. So the challenge now is more one of mindset. How do you get people into the mindset to start looking and beginning on their automation journey? So assuming you finally leap that chasm and you're starting on that journey, the next lesson learned is that vendors have very different capabilities. And it really boils down to what do you need? There are over 30 vendors out there working on robotic process automation. And that number increases to literally hundreds when you start thinking about those that are focused specifically on tools like artificial intelligence. But one size never fits all. And there isn't a silver bullet that fixes every problem. Your role is to actually find out and figure out what are your core business needs before you embark on an automation journey that lets you select the right tool for the job. When first talking to organizations about selecting an automation vendor, we focus on topics that are about the organizational need, not the vendor capabilities. Now imagine for a second if you do this the other way around, that a vendor comes to you and says, we have the solution to all of your problems, and then you embark on your automation journey. You're not guaranteed that all of those needs are going to be met. So our approach is to always focus on your needs first, evaluate and prioritize vendors based on your specific requirements. And then when you understand your requirements, you can start to look at those top priority vendors and start to evaluate their capabilities for fit. When we prioritize based on your need, the factors that we consider first of all are things like business outlook. And what do we mean by that? Well, business outlook is often what is your reason for starting an automation journey. For some organizations, it's a very strategic activity, something that is going to be across the entire organization, and it's a strategic goal. For others, it's just dipping the toe in the water to actually figure out whether automation is right for you. These two different outlooks drive different types of need, and therefore prioritize different tools or vendors for your solution. Budget is the second one. As I mentioned before, automation vendors come in many different shapes and sizes, which is good because actually we can need to find and align the right vendor for you. And budget is going to be one of those key factors. How much are you willing to spend to drive an automation change? For example, one organization we spoke with implemented a very successful pilot, but realized that the pilot would not be able to scale because they did not have sufficient budget to drive that scale. It's not always a simple case of ROI. Sometimes cash flow can also come into the frame. And the very different approaches from different vendors to licensing is something that is an important factor when we start to look at their capabilities. We're going to look in a second at different types of automation. So I'm not going to dwell on this one too much, but there are different types of automation. Some that run in the desktop, some that run in the background, some that run as chatbots. All of these are types of automation, which is the one that you need. Also, workforce management seems like an interesting question. How do you currently manage workload? Because you're going to go through an evolution. When you're fairly immature, that evolution is that the bot workforce and the people workforce are separate. So how do you manage how do you orchestrate all of those activities? So workforce management is an important factor as to whether you need it or need to integrate with existing plans. It probably shouldn't be this point on the list, but the technology fit is also important. What types of technology do you have and do you utilize? And making sure that the solution works with those technologies is an important factor. While it's fair to say most solutions work with most technologies, it's also true to say not all solutions work with all technologies. So it's worth checking that out. There is also a case of the business fit. What are the type of skills that you're going to need? So, for example, are you a very IT-centric organization, very technically competent and very technology driven? Or are you a business that doesn't have a lot of technology, that doesn't utilize a lot of in-house IT skills, and actually this is going to fit within business functions? Many automation programs fit within the business because they don't need the highly technical skills for development. However, that's not to say IT skills aren't needed. They still have to operate on existing infrastructure and interface to existing applications, and some degrees of IT and technology is particularly needed in those areas. But what is the business fit? Who's going to be doing the actual grunt work of developing these automations? Once you understand all of those things, it's very easy to create a prioritized list. And from your prioritized lists, you can start picking off the top 2 or 3 to start evaluating their capabilities. And some of the most important of their capabilities starts to boil down to things like security, governance, and scalability. How easy is it to use? What is the total cost of ownership as you scale up? And what training and resource availability is available to grow your organization? Now, resource availability and partnerships is particularly important because it varies quite significantly from different country to different country. Some countries have very strong vendor support in some areas and weaker in others. The same with partnerships and the same with training. So understanding what is available in your particular region is an important consideration. For some organizations too, a particular industry focus is really helpful. So experience of implementation within your specific area of expertise, for example in finance, may be a real bonus and something that you're also buying into. So you're not just buying the automation technology, you're also buying the experience within your particular segment. Now, all of these are just factors for you to consider, and the key takeaway from here is not to start with a vendor and fit it to your needs, but to start with your needs and find the right vendor. Helping you to achieve that is often finding the right partner. A partner can help you throughout your entire automation journey, from starting to scaling to finally sustaining. But of particular value, I think, is the insight that they can provide in the very early stages when you're trying to identify what is the right vendor for your specific problem. Lesson 3. It's not the end of the world, which would be easy to believe, especially if you read the press. In the UK, even the chairman of the Bank of England has got in on the game with quotes of 15 million jobs will be lost within the next 20 years. All of this naysaying brings about a very negative view of the problem. And when it comes to implementing RPA with artificial intelligence, it really gets dire, with people quoting the real end of the world. So, what is the reality? Well, the reality is, first of all, that RPA will only do as you're told. It literally is as simple as it gets, automating rote instructions and delivering the outcome. It really is no thought per se going into it. But this negativity does create you with a problem. 5 years ago, it was a challenge to explain what automation was because nobody really had seen it. Most people we met in those days, we would explain it as imagine an Excel macro because most people were familiar with that, and then imagine that being able to work across all of your Windows applications and not just the cells of a spreadsheet. Nowadays, of course, with all of the press, people are much more worried about their own jobs and their own roles. And so that's something that needs to be addressed. Looking across successful and unsuccessful RPA implementations, one of the components of successful implementations are those that have considered the impact on the people right from the very start and actually started out with the communication to explain what's happening. And here's the second component. Many of the organizations who have implemented RPA are feeding back that it's not about losing jobs. It's about improving quality, even improving capability and improving capacity. So the naysayers are somewhat wrong, But even in the instances where jobs are lost, there are positive ways to actually implement that program, so long as it's a clear, thoughtful and well communicated methodology right up front. So very closely linked to the last lesson is the topic of get the knowledge. So what do we mean by get the knowledge? Well, first of all, as we've already seen, there are many myths and misconceptions about what automation can do. Those myths and misconceptions vary from the end of the world through to I've got this process that's really complicated that my people struggle with. Can we automate that? Well, let's start with that. The answer to that is no, because you have to be able to understand your process to be able to start to automate it. But a lot of those myths and misconceptions all come from not having a consistent vocabulary. When I joined GE in the 90s, one of the first things that happened was I was put on green belt training, the Six Sigma program. Green belt training gave me a consistent vocabulary that I understood in terms of how to look at processes and businesses and organization. That vocabulary was invaluable because every GE organization was able to converse with each other using that exact same vocabulary. When I was looking at my part of the business running at 3.8 Sigma and somebody else was running at 1.4, we knew exactly what was going on and we could use that vocabulary as a shorthand, and we always had a consistent understanding of what that was. And so you need to create the same situation for automation. You need to create a consistent vocabulary that everybody understands and helps you then to engage not only your people but your stakeholders throughout the entire program, safe in the knowledge that you're all talking about the same thing. So here's an example. So here's a very simple example that I utilize a lot when first talking to organizations about the topic of automation. Over on the left hand side, there is what's called attended automation, the type of automation that runs interactively with users at the desktop. So I'll do a bit of the process, the robot will do a bit of the process, etc. Next along the chain, you've got unattended automation. And this is the similar thing. It runs the process, but instead of interacting with the user, it just sits in a black box or on a virtual machine on a server somewhere, waiting for something to happen, and then running the process when it's necessary. There's no interaction with end users, and this is called unattended. You then have virtual assistants or chatbots, and these virtual assistants can vary from the extremely simple, sometimes called Q&A bots or FAQ bots, right through to the very complicated virtual assistants that can understand context throughout an entire conversation. And finally, we have the topic of cognitive or intelligent automation. And here's where we sometimes run into lots of vocabulary problems because many organizations refer to this as artificial intelligence. It's fine to do so, so long as you understand the topic of what artificial intelligence is vastly broad. And when we're talking about automation, we're really only talking about a small subset of that. And the small subset of artificial intelligence we're often referring to is that of machine learning, the ability to learn from unstructured information. So for example, at the desktop, when you're starting to do attended automation, you have data in a very structured format. For example, the normal process would have been for information to have been duplicated from one system to another, and the desktop automation simply repeats that task, copying data from one system, entering it into another. The data is in a very structured format. You know exactly where you're going to get it. All the way over there on the right of the chart then, this helps us to actually deal with one of the challenges of typical robotic process automation. And that challenge is the data has to be structured. If the data is not structured, then there's very little we can do with it. So if it comes in, for example, in an email, or as just free text, or as post, all of these things are what's called unstructured information. Because you're not going to find the exact fields of data in the very same place every time. Here's where AI can help, or machine learning specifically. Machine learning are algorithms that can be applied to a specific task to extract the structured information from them. So for example, to look at an email and to be able to extract that it was a change of address, and the address to be changed to is this. Now, lots of data is needed to learn that, and a level of confidence has to be reached before it would be processed. But this is where intelligent automation really comes into its own, opening the door to all of the unstructured information that comes into your organization. Now, implicitly on this chart, going from left to right, is a level of difficulty. It's much easier to start with small pieces of processes at the desktop with an end user, and much more complicated to learn how to read an email. So you can start to sort of see from here exactly how complicated the certain types of problems are. And this vocabulary and this level of understanding will actually help some of your stakeholders to better understand when and where the type of automation is going to be right for you. Think big, but start small. Now, for many years, I actually had used this slide as some advice, was simply start small. And that is definitely good advice. But more and more awareness now of what automation can do. It's better to start thinking about where this is going up front and think about all of the opportunities and start to be building it into the organizational strategy rather than letting it just sort of grow piece by piece within the organization. Now, that's still to say starting small is a good idea. Building up the knowledge, building up the skills within your organization is crucial. And one of the ways that you can do that is by experimenting, providing a culture where you can try it out and iteratively deliver improvements. One of the things that we've certainly discovered is the more collaborative and iterative delivery methodologies fit most of these technologies the best. Now you'll hear there that I was very careful and caveated that with most. And that is because going back to your individual organizational needs and the statement that there are many different types of RPA solution out there, and there are, and some are very technical and some are very business aimed, targeted. And depending on the type of solution that you've chosen will also dictate to some degree the best approach for your particular organization. But on the whole, and as a rule of thumb, collaborative, iterative approach is definitely best, and one that suits the majority of the tools available very, very well. Don't seek the 100% solution. It probably goes without saying, but many people think about automation in the same way as they think about technology generally. And the way they think about technology generally is that whenever they've had something developed in-house, if they don't get 100% first time in the first, in phase 1, then phase 2, 3 and 4 will never come. And therefore they seek the 100% solution every time. Now that doesn't fit many modern methodologies. That thinking doesn't fit many modern methodologies. However, that is sometimes ingrained in the culture. So the 80-20 rule definitely applies. And automating the 80% that's easy to automate and finding alternative approaches for the rest is an important mindset to build in. And we actually have a model that can help organizations think about this slightly more rationally. This model from the lean days is called runners, repeaters and rogues. And I'll explain what each of these things are. At the bottom of our triangle, we have the runners. Runners are typically your bread and butter process. They're pretty rote. You can write down instruction by instruction what's needed. And on the whole, the majority of effort in the organisation is spent on runner type processes. It therefore goes without saying that runner processes are your prime candidates for RPA, whether at the desktop, attended or unattended. You then have a type of problem called repeaters. Repeaters are increases in seasonal demand. So for example, you may have a process at the end of every month that requires many more staff, or more likely it's less often, like tax year end. Tax year end generates a real peak of work that's not seen throughout the rest of the year. Whether you have these types of peaks of demand regularly or irregularly, they are still problematic for you because you have to staff to deliver them. Here's where automation can come in though, because some of the automation solutions provide a very elastic approach to driving automation. Almost imagine a pay-as-you-go model for bots. That pay-as-you-go model allows you to increase the number of bots available to demand, and then let them go again when they're not needed. So again, going back to understanding organizations' needs versus the vendor's capabilities is very important, because the differences in licensing models can really significantly impact which organizations can provide that sort of elasticity. Finally, we have our rogues. And when we look at processes, our rogues are our challenging. They're our exception cases. They're the problems that come through. They're also the cases that are really based on knowledge. And historically, this was something that you would always push to people. Now, of course, with the advent of machine learning, case by case, you can start to think about opportunities to use machine learning to address some of those cases. But on the whole, you've got to start at the beginning and start to automate your runner processes and work your way forwards from there. Deliver real impact quickly. Now, we've heard of organizations that set up innovation teams and automation functions to test and trial these tools, and that's great. Big thumbs up at that stage. But not all of those organizations take those learnings and put them into the real world. And it's crucial that what we deliver into the real world. So what we have subscribed to is helping organizations to identify processes that will have real impact, but also helping them to deliver that impact in the real world as quickly as possible. It's not necessary to get bogged down in analysis paralysis and spend years doing a full evaluation of your entire organization structure, your entire operating model, and all of your processes, and then do lean reviews on all of those processes before you begin. There is a way to funnel down to the processes that you want to look at very, very quickly. So don't get caught up in analysis paralysis, and find a way to identify those top 10 processes and evaluate those as quickly as you can. And the first step of that evaluation is simple. It really is a case of understanding what's your highest volume activities, how much touch time, i.e. how much time do you actually spend doing real work on the case, and multiply those two things up to identify your highest impact processes. And from your highest impact processes in priority order, you can start to work down and start to apply additional criteria to start to consider whether they're suitable for automation. And typical criteria you look for once you've got that prioritized list are things like, what is the percentage of rote activities compared to knowledge-based activities? Back to our runners, repeaters and rogues type activity model. Ultimately, you can very quickly identify which processes are good candidates. And contrary to those people who think that applying some optimization beforehand isn't a good idea, I'm a big proponent of believing it is a good idea, because you can take any process and optimize it in a matter of a day if you can get the right people together. And that day is time well spent, because you've now got a documented process that people understand. You've kicked the tires on and you've optimized it, and you're not wasting your time developing automation for something that's not necessary. And in the worst case scenario, you actually eliminate the processes altogether. And that would be a great shame if you automated something that ultimately wasn't needed. What are the skills you will need? Well, we've got friends in the recruitment industry, and they tell us stories of organizations looking for RPA developers, which is fine. But then in addition to the development skills, they add on lots of other requirements, such as good lean and process skills, leadership and communication skills, security, governance, etc., etc. Now, out there, some of these people probably do exist, but it's not the most efficient setup. And back to collaborative thinking, the most efficient setup is to build a team that has a mix of all of the right skills and knowledge to be able to drive the program forward. And here are probably the first few skills that you're going to need to start thinking about putting together rather than finding in a single person when you start up and start to drive your automation program. They're also the skills that are going to be a centerpiece even when you start to scale. So starting out your journey, having someone to be a bit evangelical about the whole process and being able to communicate and build that vocabulary at senior levels to help to build up that strategy, and how to make sure you've got the right communication in place so that everybody who's involved and the whole organization knows exactly what's going on. So you need a leader. The second thing you need is someone who can look at the process, that optimization before you start to automate. They all can also, though, help you through that funneling process to drill it down to which are the most important processes for you to automate that will deliver real impact first. You need someone with the RPA development skills, and these types of skills are going to vary dramatically based on the type of tool that you selected. It's interesting that we've run into a scenario where technical programmers have been given some of these RPA tools and they haven't liked it, and they've actually sort of said, I want to go and do some real, in inverted commas, some real coding. I didn't do all my training just so I can use a modeling tool. Equally, you have some very, very experienced business people who love it, because they can now instantly see the results of modeling their processes and automating their processes. Now, it does vary from tool to tool. In equal measure, there are some technologies out there that I wouldn't put business people in front of because they need a solid grounding in object-based programming, for example, to be able to use those tools. So horses for courses. You've got to figure out what is the right skill set for your type of technology. And it goes without saying, I think, and I've said that word too many times, but in this day and age, security is a key component. And most of these technologies work through the security of the desktop interface, which is a positive. But making sure that that security and interface works successfully throughout the whole organization is a key component around integration. And for example, if you've got 50 bots, do you have 50 new usernames associated with those bots? How does all of that work? And that's going to require a degree of security that's built in, and that's going to become more important, particularly when you scale. Perhaps not a big problem when you're first piloting, but certainly you've got to create a process then that works at scale. So these are the key skills that you're going to need in your collaborative team to get going with automation. moving on from getting started and into scaling up, we're on to the topic of growing pains and how do you scale up. With my architecture hat on for just a second, I look at the world in three different typical models. The first model is called a centralized model, where everything sits in the center. At the opposite extreme, you have a federated model, where each business unit and function does its own thing. This is sometimes called siloed or decentralized. And then you have a hybrid model that puts all those pieces together and takes the best of each and sort of operates to get them all in a single function. So which is the right operating model? Well, in the press, or much of the press that you will read, most of them support building a core center of excellence using the hybrid model. And that's great because as a rule of thumb, for most organizations, that is what's going to work. However, it's worth just caveating that with one size never fits all, and the fact that sometimes for some organizations, different approaches will fit. So evaluating your specific needs is going to be important. Also, your level of maturity highly impacts the type of model that best suits you. So, for example, many of today's companies that are using robotic process automation, they started their journey using the federated model. It was a single function somewhere out there in finance or one of the business back office units that started using automation, and it started to grow up from there and then to move across the whole organization. So in the early days, when you're first piloting, it really doesn't matter which model you use, because actually the most important thing is getting started. And 9 times out of 10, it's probably the federated model, because it's grown out of a specific need in a specific business unit. Occasionally, though, it does grow out of a more centralized approach, where it is a specific strategic initiative and a strategic central team, typically in IT, because of the consideration that it's more of a technology process, technology ownership, then a core center of excellence is created. The challenges of a core center of excellence growing out of IT, though, can sometimes be excessive amounts of governance for the type of problems being solved and the types of technology being used. And that's why when you start to scale up, it's likely to be the hybrid model that works for you. The hybrid model puts core skills such as governance and security in the center, but still allows flexibility in the individual business units to be able to develop and deploy automations themselves. Final word on this is, of course, while the hybrid model works typically for most, it's not the only approach, and sometimes centralized or federated can be the right approach for you. And again, it's something to consider your own specific business needs before you choose. Our penultimate lesson learned is to combine RPA and AI for best success. I believe I've mentioned already that one of the challenges of RPA is that it's only capable of working with very structured processes and structured data. One of the advantages of artificial intelligence or machine learning is that it works fine with unstructured data and unstructured processes. So actually, RPA provides the gateway for introducing artificial intelligence into your organization. Once you've started to automate some simple processes, you can then start to look at those more challenging inputs and start to think, how can we structure that? And that lets you start to build these small machine learning algorithms that can do a specific job well. So RPA and AI are great together. They are really two separate disciplines that can work quite fine independently, but together they actually offer some new opportunities. While robotic process automation typically is just referring to the topic of automation, intelligent automation is typically the combination of RPA and machine learning. And that automation and machine learning sits atop your normal systems. And above that, you actually have your more strategic and organizational objectives. So for example, what are your customer demands? What's your approach to people? And what are the processes that you undertake? So the integration of automation and AI is referred to as intelligent automation. But the model doesn't stop there, because we actually want to combine RPA and AI and analytics for the greatest success. One of the things RPA starts to do is generate lots of data about your processes. That data can then provide opportunities for even further machine learning to improve your processes. So it really is the combination of data, process or process automation, and AI or machine learning that delivers you a digital process automation. Digital process automation is a term occasionally used. It's sort of coming into usage now to refer to the combination of all of these three things. Which brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. And one of the conclusions is that even those organizations that have been on this journey for some time are still only automating a small fraction of the potential. And while there are many organizations that haven't yet started, they're taking those first steps is getting simpler and cheaper to do. So there are really no barriers to waiting. This is the beginning. Let's get going and automate.